Welcome to Lunch Poems. It's a great pleasure to be here again in this beautiful room. I think this is our 11th season, 12th. I need especially to thank, though this looks like a perfect place to give a reading, the purpose of this room is for people to, it's a library, it's a place for people to read quietly, and if any of you students are here for the first time, this is your room. You can come here anytime for the beauty and quiet of this place. And it's through the generation of Alex Warren that we're allowed to turn it into a reading space. It's actually a great hassle for him. So this is to thank you, Alex, for this every year. And Dave Dewar, who's director of development for the library, who's just been an invaluable guest of the series and part of the committee that makes it happen. And the director of the series, Kristen Sprania, who's right here. We have a wonderful set of readings this year. Let me just quickly describe them to you. The first reader is an old friend of mine named John Matthias. Someone called him the most English of American poets. He married an English admiral's daughter and lived for a while in one of those Cambridgeshire villages called Cherry Hinton. And he spends the rest of his time in the Midwest. So he writes experimental poems about Midwestern rivers and the archaeology of English villages. Someone called him, Robert Duncan, called him one of those wandering souls out of the dark ages who came into our time looking very happy. So he'll be great fun. That's followed by one of the most interesting and controversial poets in our midst, the African-American beat poet Amiri Baraka, who will be here on November 1st, followed by a very young and exciting new Mexico City-born American poet, Monica de la Torre, who's living in Brooklyn. She's going to be coming and reading to us. You get a sense of the edge in new poetry. In February, the first Asian-American poet to graduate from Berkeley and to publish a book of poems, wonderful poet named Arthur Z., who lives in Santa Fe, New Mexico, is going to be coming home to Berkeley and reading his poetry. World-renowned beat poet Diane DePrima, author of the scandalous memoirs of a beatnik, student of Zen and Tibetan Buddhism, Sanskrit and alchemy, is going to be reading in March. And our own young prize-winning graduate student poet, Jessica Fisher, whose first book was just chosen for the very prestigious Yale Younger Poets first book series, will finish the readings in April. So it's going to be a gorgeous set of readings this year, and it will end with a student reading as we begin each year with this wonderful reading. All of the readers have to take time out of busy schedules to do this. Ben Braun, who's so kind to be here, has basketball practice at 1 that he's got to run to. The assistant chancellor, Beata Fitzgerald, is here, though she is supposed to work 18 hours a day. This is the beautiful place in which to rest. Anyway, and all of you, thank you so much for coming and being part of this community. To introduce this series today, the person who makes it possible by supporting us in this way, the university librarian Tom Leonard.
Thank you, Bob. Welcome to your library. Perhaps in getting here today, you walked past the rather stirring front page displays near the Free Speech Movement Cafe. The front pages are in many languages, larger than life, and in full color, often the color of flames and dust, the world being what it is. I know the donor who made this possible would not object if we switched out one of those front pages and put instead the verse of William Carlos Williams. It is difficult to get the news from poems, yet men die miserably every day for lack of what is found there. I know that the 10 people who will follow me subscribe to that sentiment, and I know that all of you do as well. Ben, welcome again to the library. You've been the head basketball coach, I now understand, for only 1 year less than the whole lunch poem series. He established the Golden Bear program that has earned respect and admiration both in the Bay Area and across the country. During his tenure at Cal, Ben has directed the Bears to more postseason appearances and more postseason victories than any coach in the school's history, including 5 NCAA tournament berths. I don't remember saying that at a previous gathering of poetry, but I'm glad to say it now. He earned his teaching degree in English in June of 1975 with a minor in African American Studies. 5 years later, he earned his master's degree in guidance and counseling from Siena Heights. Welcome to the podium, Ben.
Well, first, let me clear something up. And unfortunately, it's on TV and tape, so it's going to get back to my players, but I'd rather be here than practice. Fact of the matter is, I was an English teacher before I was a coach, so I did both. I've been coaching and teaching for 30 years, high school and college level. And I was just remarking today that I've coached in front of 20,000 people, and I don't get nervous at all. And now I'm reading a poem, and I've got the shakes right now, so I don't want my players to hear that either. You know, I've invited 4 people here, and all 4 showed up. Just 4, that's all. My staff is here, they showed up. My wife Jessica is here, she showed up. I also invited Vice Chancellor Don McQuaid, he showed up. No surprise there. And I invited Jeff Ferrato from the Oakland Tribune, and gosh darn it, he showed up. So Jeff, you might appreciate this story in reference to the poem I'm going to read, because it's a little bit about critics. And Jeff, as I kid him often, is really, I think, the best writer that I've ever been around. He's covered our program since I've been here. He's fair, he's honest, a little too honest sometimes, but he's very good. And it's an interesting thing, but some people have asked about our most recent recruit. Our recruit that just signed with us only a couple of weeks ago, Max Zhang, who's from China. He's 7'3", but we measured him yesterday. He's really only 7'2½". So I want you to give you the correct size on that, 7'2½". But as is typical, as some of us who get critics as it goes, I had a colleague right from our staff ask me, and it wasn't a reporter this time, Jeff, said, "Coach, how's that player from China? Is he pretty good?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "And he's really 7'3". I said, "Pretty close." He said, "You know, but is he a good shooter?" I said, "Actually, he's got pretty good range. He can shoot the ball to 3. He said, "Really? Can he rebound?" I said, "Yeah, I think he's a pretty good rebounder." He said, "But yeah, you know, can he block shots and intimidate near the basket?" I said, "I think he can do that." And finally, I thought I had him. He says, "Yeah, but can he handle the ball?" I said, "No, you got me there. He's not a great ball handler." So that's the criticism we got to come up against. You know, I've often read and taught and shared poems with my players over the years, as was done with me when I was a player. Whether it was my parents who taught me a lot about poetry, or my former teachers and professors, or coaches. I think it's been a great tool, and has brought me back to something that I think everybody can relate to. Students and players often say that they don't understand poetry, and you know, it's difficult, and that it is. And I try to tell them that they simply have to feel poetry to appreciate it or relate to it. And I remember telling my professor when I was back in college, I said on this subject, you know, I said, "Hey, I'm not very knowledgeable on the subject of poetry." And I remember him saying this, and he said to me, "Remember this." He said, "Knowledge comes by the way of ignorance, so we ought to all be encouraged by what we don't know." And I always remembered that. So here I go about some things I didn't know about, and I do now. My poem today is "If" by Rudyard Kipling. If you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you, if you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowance for their doubting too, if you can wait and not be tired by waiting or being lied about, don't deal in lies, or being hated, don't give way to hating. And yet don't look too good nor talk too wise. If you can dream and not make dreams your master, if you can think and not make thoughts your aim, if you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two impostors just the same, if you can bear to hear the truth you've spoken, twisted by knaves to make a trap for fools, or watch the things you gave your life to, broken, and stoop and build them up with worn-out tools. If you can make one heap of all your winnings and risk it all on one turn of pitch and toss, and lose and start again at your beginnings, and never breathe a word about your loss. If you can force your heart and nerve and sinew to serve your turn long after they are gone, and so hold on when there is nothing in you except the will which says to them, hold on. If you can talk with crowds and keep your virtue, or walk with kings nor lose the common touch, if neither foes nor loving friends can hurt you, if all men count with you, but none too much, if you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, yours is the earth and everything that's in it, and which is more, you'll be a man, my son. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Our next reader is Janet Broughton, who is the Dean of Arts and Humanities. She is an authority on 17th and 18th century philosophy, and her research focuses on the history of modern philosophy, particularly Scottish philosopher David Hume and the French philosopher René Descartes. Broughton has taught courses in the UC Berkeley Philosophy Department on skepticism, free will, the mind-body problem, and the nature of personal identity, as well as the history of philosophy. Janet, saw you a minute ago. Welcome.
I took ancient Greek in my freshman year in college, and in the 40-plus years since then, I'm sorry to say I've forgotten every declension and conjugation that I ever learned. But what I didn't forget were the lines of poetry that Miss Pearson had us memorize, and today I'd like to read a few. These are the opening lines of a poem of jealousy and passion, written by Sappho, a poet who lived about 2,700 years ago. I'll also read you a literal translation of the entire poem, plus a translation of it by an American poet. Fina timoi kenos the oison emen oner, otis enantios toi istane kai plasion aduphonisas upakue, kai galaisas imorowen tomemon, cardian in stathason eptoison. He seems to me like a god, that man who sits across from you, close, listening to your sweet voice and charming laugh. It makes my heart shake in my chest to see you. I can't make a sound. My tongue is broken. Suddenly, a fire rushes under my skin. My eyes see nothing. My ears hear a roar. Sweat pours down me, and a trembling seizes me. I'm paler than grass and seem to myself close to dying. Catullus translated this poem into Latin 2,200 years ago, Ronsard into French in the 16th century, Byron into English in the 19th. And I'd like to read you a translation by Robert Lowell, an American poet of the 20th century. I set that man above the gods and heroes. All day he sits before you face to face like a card player. Your elbow brushes his elbow. If you should speak, he hears. The touched heart madly stirs. Your laughter is water hurrying over pebbles. Every gesture is a proclamation. Every sound is speech. Refining fire purifies my flesh. I hear you, a hollowness in my ears thunders and stuns me. I cannot speak, I cannot see, I shiver. A dead whiteness spreads over my body, trickling pinpricks of sweat. I am greener than the greenest green grass. I die. 2,700 years from now, will people still be writing poems of passion? And will they still be stirred by the poems of their ancestors? I certainly hope so. As Robert Frost said, poetry is a way of remembering that which it would impoverish us to forget.
Thank you, Janet. My library colleague, Jennifer Dorner, has, I believe, the shortest tenure and shortest walk of all of us. She works right over in Moffett Library, and she joined us in June of '07. She became then the head of instructional services at the Doe Moffett Libraries. She previously worked as a librarian at Portland State University and as information literacy coordinator at Lewis and Clark College, both in Portland. Jennifer is an active member of the Association of College and Research Libraries and is currently the past chair of that organization's instruction section. Welcome, Jennifer.
My interest in the work that I'm going to read today stems from my own research on the Russian Orthodox influence in southeastern Alaska Native cultures and the persistence of Russian Orthodoxy as an organized religion despite the influx of American Protestant missionaries in 1867 and the extended absence of Russian priests after 1917. The work I'm reading is a song text first published in Russian by Yoan Venaiminov, a Russian Orthodox missionary who arrived in the Aleutian Islands of Alaska in 1824. With the assistance of Ivan Penkov, an Aleut island leader, Venaiminov developed an orthography for the Aleutian language and collected examples of their original oral traditions. The Song of the Atkin Aleuts was told to the Russian Orthodox priest Yakov Netsvedov in the 1830s by his mother, who was an Aleut. Netsvedov was a graduate of the Irkutsk Theological Seminary and returned to the island of Atka in the 1830s when he served as the first native Orthodox priest. He contributed the Song of the Atkin Aleuts to Venaimanov's Notes on the Islands of the Unalashka district, published in 1840. I'm reading the English translation because I cannot read the original Russian or the Aleut, published by Knut Bergslund in the Transactions of the American Philosophical Society in 1959. This translation retains the original rhythm of the song, but as the Aleut word order very often is the inverse of the English one, the meaning may not be entirely clear. The song tells the story of how a hunter, alone in his kayak, in vain chases a sea lion, and coming back expresses his joy at hearing the drums calling for a dancing feast. The undaring's deeds to do, from here myself hiding. When I went out today, looking around as I was paddling along, an animal, a sea lion, conveniently rising to the surface that was seeing, in front of him stopping. I started to think, undaring who even is, his plan himself to be able to carry out on him expecting, my plan that I would carry out anyhow expecting, of my kayak, of the stern, from the top, a spear, pulling out from under the cross straps, unsheathing, putting in front, at him paddling, at him getting, although I speared him, the spear into him, as I had not made enter, frenzied away he got. After him paddling, although I was spearing him, anything not doing to him, in vain of my spears spoiling the points at him. To be seen in order not precisely, myself hiding as I had gone out to that end, somebody to see, although looking around, doing it in vain, with whom to cry if I had had, crying anyway, like feeling. There, after having lain still, to go back paddling off, going back when I landed to, in particular loving, for calling the spirits which I the drum to, my ears opening in vain, its sounding, not hearing, that to be right so expected which I had, doing there you are, behold. But your drums taking, open up your mouths high. The song is sung by a dancer before he is preparing to dance, and when he finishes, those sitting around him begin beating their drums and singing, and he dances and acts as a hunter. Now, a later translation by Newt Bursland makes the meaning a little bit more evident. To do what a sluggish man would do, I went out in a bidarka secretly from here today, and as I was paddling along, looking around, I saw an animal, a sea lion, going surfacing joyously and stopping. Paddling in front of him, I began to thinking that even a sluggish man could carry out on him what he tried to do. I thought that I would carry out what I tried to do, pulled a spear from the top of the stern of my bidarka, removed the sheath and put it in front of me, and paddling toward him, I got near him and speared him. But as I did not make the spear penetrate, he got startled and went away. After paddling after him, I speared him again and again, but doing nothing to him, I spoiled in vain the points of my spears on him. And as I had gone out secretly, precisely not to see anybody, I looked around in vain to see somebody, feeling like crying if I had had someone to cry together with. And after having lain still there, I paddled off to go back. Went back, and when I landed to that one I loved most and think myself to be the master of, the drum, I kept my ears open but did not hear it sounding. And there, just as I have been thinking it to be, you are there now. But take your drums and open your mouths now. By preserving the oral traditions and by creating a literary language for the Aleuts, Johan van Eymenhoff provided tools that the Aleuts are now using to reclaim their culture. In Atka now, they are relearning traditional dances and these songs, which express pantheistic beliefs in animals and the spirit world, while still retaining their devotion to the Russian Orthodox faith. It was my pleasure to discover this while I was doing my research, and I'm glad that I had the opportunity to share it with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Iban Francisco has worked for physical plant campus services for nearly 18 years, starting as a typist clerk and now today a principal analyst. Prior to coming to UC Berkeley, he spent 8 years making neckties on Telegraph Avenue, 2 years as a stage manager at Bear Stage, 2 years in a New Jersey zinc mine, and 5 years at Rolling Stone magazine. He wrote a poem in the 5th grade entitled Felix Flubb and His Piper Cub. 45 years later, he joins us with his second poem. I won't anticipate what he will read. And he's been writing poetry ever since. Welcome.
So I arrived here at a slightly different route. When I discovered a couple weeks ago that I wasn't supposed to be reading my own poetry. So I spent some time in the library, and with apologies to the greatest public research university in the world, a lot of what I know about Pablo Neruda I found on Wikipedia. And I was just amazed to discover this person. Pablo Neruda, he was born Ricardo Naftali Urreas Basualto in 1904 in Chile. He was a poet, an author, a diplomat, a politician, a communist, a Marxist, a humanist, in no particular order. He started writing at age 13, and in 1924, at age 20, had gained international acclaim as a writer with a collection of love poetry, 20 poems of love and 1 ode of desperation. It's a pretty good ratio. Among his other works, Canto General, a collection of 340 poems on Latin American history and the struggle for social justice, an ode to broken things about, this is one of my favorites, about all the useless broken things that no one has actually broken. And a poem called I'm Explaining a Few Things about the Spanish Civil War. Won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1971, quote, for a poetry that with the action of an elemental force brings alive a continent's destiny and dreams. In 1945, he performed readings of his poetry to 100,000 people in Sao Paulo, Brazil, in celebration of a communist revolutionary, Luis Carlos Prestes, and later to 70,000 at the invitation of Salvador Allende following his return from the Nobel proceedings. 100,000 people for a poetry reading. I suspect there might have been something else going on there at the same time, but at his death in 1973, the Chilean military dictator Augusto Pinochet forbade all public demonstrations. Nonetheless, the streets filled with mourners to celebrate the life of their champion. It was marked as the first public protest against Pinochet's military dictatorship, and so even in death, he played a role. He was one of the greatest, most prolific, and most influential poets of the 20th century, and a lifelong advocate for social justice and rights of the underserved. So as a poet myself, I often wonder where that comes from, which inspires me to read this poem from Pablo Neruda. It's called, appropriately enough, Poetry. And it was at that age poetry arrived in search of me. I don't know where it came from winter or a river. I don't know how or when. No, they were not voices. They were not words, nor silence. But from a street I was summoned from the branches of night, abruptly from the others. Among violent fires or returning alone, there I was without a face, and it touched me. I did not know what to say. My mouth had no way with names. My eyes were blind, and something started in my soul, fever or forgotten wings. And I made my own way, deciphering that fire, and I wrote the first faint line. Faint, without substance, pure nonsense, pure wisdom of someone who knows nothing. And suddenly I saw the heavens unfastened and open, planets palpitating, plantations, shadow perforated, riddled with arrows, fire and flowers, the winding night, the universe. And I, infinitesimal being, drunk with the great starry void, likeness, image of mystery, felt myself a pure part of the abyss. I wheeled with the stars. My heart broke loose on the wind.
Lucia Jacobs is an associate professor in the Department of Psychology and the Institutes of Cognitive Science and Neuroscience. Trained in evolutionary biology and animal behavior, her research focuses on the evolution of spatial memory and navigation. This focus has led to comparative studies of spatial memory in species that hide and retrieve seeds in scattered locations, such as gray squirrels, fox squirrels, flying squirrels, and kangaroo rats, as well as studies of species differences in both learning and brain structure. Welcome, Professor Jacobs.
Well, I've got a poem about a squirrel. No, I don't, actually. I've got a poem, an untitled poem from 1919 by Marina Tsvetaeva, who is in Russia now considered one of the four great poets of the 20th century, but because she commits suicide in 1941 as the Germans invaded, and because she was considered on the wrong side of the fence by the Soviet regime, she was lost for many years and in fact is just beginning to be rediscovered. She was first introduced really in a substantial scholarly way to the English-speaking world in 1965 when Simon Karlinski wrote his PhD thesis on her, his Berkeley PhD. His advisor was Frank Whitfield, who founded the Department of Slavic Languages. Berkeley's actually played a substantial role in her recognition. But many critics consider her best work was done between the years of 1923 and 1925, when she and the other white Russians fled first to Berlin and then ended up in Prague, where the Czech government offered scholarships to Russian intellectuals and put them up in this tiny, muddy village, primitive village outside of Prague, where they all lived and had this very feverish intellectual and artistic life. So my mother's Russian, and my family was in the same village at the same time, and my grandfather delivered Tsvetaeva's first son, actually, in 1925, and my great aunt was a close friend of hers. And when I was trying to learn Russian, finally, of course, never having learned it earlier, my great aunt recorded a poem for me. And so I brought her recording, and I'm also going to read my mother's translation of the poem first. So it's an untitled poem, 1919. The sun is alone, but marches through all cities. The sun is mine. I will give it to no one, not for an hour, not one ray, not one look, to no one, never. Let the cities die in eternal night. I'll take it into my hands so that it no longer spins in a circle. Let my hands, my lips, my heart be burnt. Let it disappear into the eternal night. I will chase after its steps. My son, I will never give you up. Actually, I think that's a great metaphor for any intellectual pursuit of the truth. Now I will attempt to play my Aunt Katya reading this in 1980 at the age of 83.
Солнце одно, а шагает по всем городам. Солнце мое, я его никому не отдам. Ни за час, ни на луч, ни на взгляд, никому никогда. Пусть погибают бессменные ночи города. В руки возьму, чтобы не смело вертеться в кругу. Пусть себе руки и губы и сердце сожгу. Вечную ночь пропадет, погонюсь по следам. Солнце мое, я тебя никому не отдам.
Thank you. Kathleen McCarthy is an associate professor of classics and comparative literature, and she's starting her 13th year at Berkeley. Her research is primarily focused on Latin poetry, including dramatic poetry, but she enjoys reading and teaching a wide variety of literary forms. She has recently won the American Philological Association's highest honor, as well as the UC Berkeley's Distinguished Teaching Award. Kathleen.
Thank you. I thought that I was going to have to make an argument for reading a poem in a language other than English, but I've already been preceded by several great examples of this, so I'm not going to make that argument. And what I'd like to do, I am reading, I'm not going to read a whole poem of Horace, but I'm going to read a couple stanzas from a poem of Horace. And when I thought about which poem to do, I decided to choose a poem which has a translation in English which has a certain notoriety on its own as an English poem. So I chose a poem. Latin poems, you may know, don't really have titles. They're often known by their first few words. So this one is called De fugere nives, which means the snows have fled. And it has a translation written in the early 20th century by A.E. Housman, who was equally famous as a classical scholar and as an English poet. And I think, to me, one of the things that's striking about thinking about these two poems together, the poems offer a theme which I don't think that we could call unfamiliar or unusual. They juxtapose the cyclical the cyclical time that we see in nature, the return of the seasons, to the one-directional time of a single human life, the irreversibility of that single human life. So even though that theme is not particularly unusual, one of the things that I was struck by as I was thinking about these two poems, Housman and Horace were both poets who were interested in recuperating earlier forms of poetry and sort of re-inhabiting earlier forms. And importantly for Housman, this didn't include Greek and Latin poetry. He was a scholar of Greek and Latin, but his own poetry was not really shaped by Greek and Latin, or at least he claimed that, and it's not shaped in any obvious way. But he was very interested in going back to earlier Victorian forms, and his poetry seems kind of anachronistic in his own time. And Horace, on the other hand, especially in the Odes, which is one from the collection from which I'm going to read today, is going back to archaic Greek poetry, a sample of which you heard from Janet Broughton, the Sappho, and interested in bringing that over into Latin. And one of the things that I've been thinking about with these poems is, again, picked up by Janet Broughton's reading and her comment on it, which is the poems very obviously contrast these two kinds of time, the natural cyclical time and the human time. But the very action of each poem calls to our attention the way that memory and language complicate that dichotomy, right? I won't say it exactly bridges across, but it makes human time a lot more complicated, because although human time is still irreversible, memory and language complicate what that irreversibility means. So I'm going to read the first two stanzas in Latin, and then I'll read the whole translation. Diffugere nues redeunt iam gramina campis arboribus comae. Mutat terra vices et decrescentia ripas flumina praetereunt. Gratia cum nymphis geminisque sororibus audet ducere nuda chorus. In mortalia ne speres, monet annus et almum quae rapet hora diem. The snows are fled away. Leaves on the shaws and grasses in the mead renew their birth. The river to the riverbed withdraws, and altered is the fashion of the earth. The nymphs and graces three put off their fear, and unapparelled in the woodland play. The swift hour and the brief prime of the year say to the soul, thou wast not born for aye. Thaw follows frost. Hard on the heel of spring treads summer, sure to die. For hard on hers comes autumn with his apples scattering, then back to wintertide when nothing stirs. But oh, whate'er the sky-led seasons mar, moon upon moon rebuilds it with her beams. Come we where Tullus and where Ancus are, and good Aeneas, we are dust and dreams. Torquatus, if the gods in heaven shall add the morrow to the day, what tongue has told? Feast then thy heart, for what thy heart has had, the fingers of no air will ever hold. When thou descendest once the shades among, the stern assize and equal judgment o'er, not thy long lineage nor thy golden tongue, no, nor thy righteousness shall friend thee more. Night holds Hippolytus, pure of stain. Diana steads him nothing, he must stay. And Theseus leaves Pirithous in the chain the love of comrades cannot take away.
Thank you, Kathleen. I would describe my friend Paul Parish as a tenured bartender at the faculty club. He is certainly as well an accomplished writer, dance critic, and teacher. He is, as many of you know, an FOB, or friend of Bill Clinton, whom he first met in New Orleans in 1968 when they were both named Rhodes Scholars. Paul has become a respected ballet journalist and has been published in US and European journals, as well as livening our noonday, many days of the year. Paul.
I was wondering what you were going to find to say. I've chosen a poem to read that I've been trying to memorize since I was in high school. And I dedicate it to my high school English teacher, Lucille Person, who made us memorize and recite poems every Friday. She didn't have us memorize The Tiger. And I think she was wise in that, because I don't think there's anybody that can read it. John Gielgud maybe could have read it. Helen Mirren should have a go at it before it's too late. My friend Tom, who you must know, he's a graduate classicist, came over. Last night we tried to scan The Tiger using Latin prosody, and we decided that there's nothing Latin about it. This poem is so English, it's just incredible. It is so English. And your mother's translation of that poem is wonderful English. And it's in this tradition because it's monosyllables. English is monosyllabic poetry. And it's just this gritty flow of, or sometimes it's a pounding flow, but it's block, block, block. And the middle of this poem actually sounds more like Beowulf than any other poem. When I was at Oxford, I learned Beowulf, and this is a typical line from Beowulf. Men nakunan, soðin to seja, haleth under hevnum, whem the last on fan. It's so economical, you cannot squeeze anything in there. There's hardly any syllables that aren't working. And this poem does that. I'd also like to dedicate it to my friend Sky, who killed himself over the weekend. And he was an astrobiologist. And the questions in this poem are maybe at the close to the heart of what was the problem. The poet was mad. He's the only great English poet who's certifiably mad, William Blake. Everybody knows that he was mad. And he's a great poem, and the poem contains more pain than body can stand. But it is so well made. With lel letras locken. The words are locked to each other, and they contain this ferocity, rather like the panther, Rilke's Panther. I think he must have known it, and the more I think about it, the more I think that it's written in such simple English, and it's so close to Old English, that a German could read it without knowing English. And that Rilke could probably have read it if he didn't know English, and he must have known it. And also to my friend Casey Finch, who died 10 years ago. And he was a great poet. It's one of the songs of experience by William Blake, The Tiger. And it was a great favorite of Allen Ginsberg's, and I hope he would approve of what I'm going to do. How do you get that on there? Okay. Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry? Is in what distant depths or skies burnt the fire of thine eyes? On what wings dare he aspire? What the hand dare seize the fire? And what shoulder and what art could twist the sinews of thy heart. And when thy heart began to beat, what dread hands and what dread feet, what the hammer, what the chain, in what furnace was thy brain? What the anvil, what dread grasp could its deadly terrors clasp? When the stars threw down their spears and watered heaven with their tears, did he smile his work to see? Did he who made the lamb make thee? Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye dare frame thy fearful symmetry? I'd like to point out that the word what occurs 14 times in these 6 lines. And the word what is the first line of Beowulf. It's the first word of Beowulf, in which it has the force of a thunderclap. Tom, my friend over here, has the word what. It's a bumper sticker on his car. And it's the opening line, and it's just like a summons to attention. So you've got to pay attention. What? Thank you.
Our last 2 readers form a special class. They were, in fact, teaching class when we began this program. We're very grateful they could make it over here in time. Aftab Ahmad has taught Urdu language and literature in the Department of South and Southeastern Asian Studies at UC Berkeley since the fall of 2006. His numerous writings have focused on the humorous and satirical work of this family of literature and language. Please welcome to the podium.
Thank you. I have chosen to read a poem written by Dr. Muhammad Iqbal, a poet who wrote in the first half of the 20th century and who is considered to be one of the greatest Urdu poets. The title of the poem is Jibril o Iblis. Jibril, Gabriel, and Iblis, Lucifer. This poem is in the form of a dialogue between these 2 characters. And I have always liked this poem because, apart from its poetic values that are no doubt great, it reminds me of looking into my conditionings. After reading the poem first time, I could almost see how an old image of Lucifer melted away and another image was formed, a positive one, a dynamic, fascinating, and inspiring image. But the most important point of this whole process was that this made me conscious of how we make images and believe in them. And this realization has had a liberating effect on me. So this poem assumes a chance meeting between Gabriel and Lucifer. It begins with Gabriel's inquiry of Lucifer about the world, and Lucifer metaphorically describes the world in one line. Then Gabriel, in a tone full of tenderness and sympathy, says that in heaven angels still wonder if it could be possible that Lucifer be restored to his old exalted status. So the dialogue goes on, and now I would read first the original Urdu poem, and then I would read the translation by V.G. Kiernan. Okay, first Urdu poem. Jibril. Jibril means Gabriel. Hamdame Darina kaisa hai jahane rangobu? Iblis, Lucifer. Sozo sazo dardo dago justuju arzu. जिब्रील, हर घड़ी अफलाक पर रहती है तेरी गुफ्तगू, क्या नहीं मुमकिन कि तेरा चाक दामन हो रफू? इब्लीस, आह ए जिब्रील तू वाकिफ़ नहीं इस राज से, कर गया सरमस्त मुझको टूट कर मेरा सबू। अब यहाँ मेरी गुज़र मुमकिन नहीं, किस कदर खामोश है ये आलमे बेकाखुकू। जिसकी नौमीदी से हो सोज़े दरूने कायनात, उसके हक़ में तकनतू अच्छा है या ला तकनतू। जिब्रील खो दिए इनकार से तूने मकामाते बुलंद, चश्मे यज़दा में फ़रिश्तों की रही क्या आबरू। Iblis, and this is the climax of the poem, and Iblis becomes Lucifer becomes a very commanding figure. So, Iblis, है मेरी जुर्रत से मुश्ते खाक में ज़ौक़े नमू, मेरे फितने जामे अक्लो खिरत के तारोपू। देखता है तू फ़कत साहिल से रज़्मे खैर व शर, कौन तूफ़ान के तमाचे खा रहा है मैं कि तू। खिद्र भी बेदस्तो पा, इलियास भी बेदस्तो पा, मेरे तूफ़ान यम बयम दरिया बदरिया जू बजू। गर कभी खलवत मैसर हो तो पूछ अल्लाह से, किस्से आदम को रंगी कर गया किसका लहू। मैं खटकता हूँ दिले यज़दा में कांटे की तरह, तू फ़कत अल्लाहु अल्लाहु अल्लाहु। I would read the translation. Gabriel, comrade of ancient days, how fares the world of sight and sound? Lucifer, in fire and rage and grief and pain and hope and longing drowned. Gabriel, no hour goes by in paradise, but your name is spoken there. Is it not possible that rent robe be mended that you wear? Lucifer, ah, Gabriel, you have never guessed my mystery, alas. Maddened forever, I left upon heaven's floor my broken glass. Impossible, oh, impossible, I should dwell here again. Silent, how silent all this realm, no palace, no loud lane. I, whose despair is the fire by which the universe is stirred. What should I do? All hope renounce or hope yet in God's word? Gabriel, your mutiny has put our high state in heaven to shame. In the Creator's eyes, what credit now can angels claim? Lucifer, but in man, a pinch of dust, my daring spirit has breathed ambition. The warp and woof of mind and reason are woven of my sedition. The deeps of good and evil you only see from land's far verge. Which of us is it, you or I, that dares the tempest's scourge? Your ministers and your prophets are pale shades. The storms I teem roll down ocean by ocean, river by river, stream by stream. Ask this of God when next you stand within his sight, whose blood is it has painted man's long history so bright? In the heart of the Almighty, like a pricking thorn I lie. I would repeat this line. In the heart of the Almighty, like a pricking thorn I lie. You only cry forever, God, O God Most High. Thank you.
I would like to restore Kay Kim Richards to her proper order here. I could say that I was blinded by the reflection of the East Asian Library when I looked over your name. Kay is a lecturer and coordinator of the Korean language program in the Department of East Asian Languages and Cultures. A poet and essayist herself, she writes both in Korean and English and translates Korean literature into English with the help of her husband, Stephen Richards. Welcome to the podium.
I love these lunch poem series. I learned so much by sitting here, and I'm hoping that experience has been pretty intense. I will make your moments light with somewhat lighter poems. As we talk about learning foreign language in college, I also took French in college, and this is one of the poems that I got to read and still remember. Not by heart, though. It's written by Jacques Prévert, who was born in 1900 and died in 1977. And the local and very celebrated poet Lawrence Ferlinghetti actually translated this into English. It's actually poems from Parole and in 1964, and I happen to have that book, which was very lucky. So here we go. It's called Le Cancre. Il dit non avec la tête, mais il dit oui avec le cœur. Il dit oui à ce qu'il aime, il dit non au professeur. Il est debout, on le questionne, et tous les problèmes sont posés. Soudain, le fou rire le prend, et il efface tout, les chiffres et les mots, les dates et les noms, les phrases et les pièges, et malgré les menaces du maître, sous les huées des enfants prodiges, avec des craies de toutes les couleurs, sur le tableau noir du malheur, il dessine le visage du bonheur. The English version is, I'm sure most of you understood, but anyway, the dunce. He says no with his head, but he says yes with his heart. He says yes to what he loves. He says no to the teacher. He stands, he's questioned, and all the problems are posed. Sudden laughter seizes him, and he erases all, the words and figures, names and dates, sentences and snares, and despite the teacher's threats to the jeers of infant prodigies, with chalk of every color on the blackboard of misfortune, he draws the face of happiness. I'm always wondering if any of my students are doing this in my class. I absolutely have the empathy for them. The next poem is written by a Korean poet by the name of Kim Chun-soo. He was born in 1922 and passed away just this year. He was greatly mourned, and so in honor of his passing, I would like to read a poem written by him. It's called Flower, and I'll read it in Korean first. 꽃, 내가 그의 이름을 불러주기 전에는 그는 다만 하나의 물상에 지나지 않았다. 내가 그의 이름을 불러주었을 때 그는 나에게로 와서 꽃이 되었다. 내가 그의 이름을 불러준 것처럼 나의 이 빛깔과 향기에 알맞는 누가 나의 이름을 불러다오. 그에게로 가서 나도 그의 꽃이 되고 싶다. 우리들은 모두 무엇이 되고 싶다. 너는 나에게, 나는 너에게 잊혀지지 않는 하나의 의미가 되고 싶다. The English translation is flower. Until I called him by name, he was merely an image, an object. When I did call him by name, he came to me and became a flower. In just the way I called him by name, will someone kindly call me by a name that goes with my hue and fragrance? I too wish to go to him and become a flower. We all wish to become something, you for me and I for you. We want to mean something that will not be forgotten. Thank you.
I'd like to invite Cecil Giscombe to close out our readings today. Cecil comes to us from Penn State, where he has taught since 1998. He earned his bachelor's degree from SUNY at Albany and a Master of Fine Arts at Cornell. He specializes in creative writing with a focus on poetry and nonfiction prose. His own poetry has been widely anthologized, and he is the author of several books of poems. Welcome.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm the new guy. I've been. This is I believe my 5th week in the Bay Area, so I'm very pleased to be here. I'm from Ohio. I grew up there in the 1950s, the 1960s, and among the memories of my childhood and my adolescence are the stories of Warren G. Harding that I heard from adults. Stories that were current at the time in the milieu, in the black middle class. Harding, as we certainly all know, was the 29th president. He was a newspaper guy from Marion, Ohio, and he was not a terribly successful president. Really, he was the oblivious head of an administration that had corruption issues. When he went to Washington, a group of his backers went with him who became known as the Ohio Gang. And terrible scandals were perpetrated after that. Harding died in office. The rumor was that he had eaten bad crab meat on a trip to Alaska. He was the first president to go to Alaska. The other rumor was that he died of a broken heart. It was in Alaska that news of the corruption of his administration reached him, and he was very unhappy about that. But the thing for us about Harding when I was growing up was the talk of his black ancestors, and his sister, who was a well-known colored policewoman in Washington, D.C. Reading about this much later in my life, I saw that Harding never denied his ancestry, and because of that, because he never denied it, it sputtered as a campaign issue, and simply died. It's not something that people talk about these days, although perhaps they will at some point. I'm going to read 2 poems. It's actually called 2 Poems About President Harding by James Wright. A few years ago, I dragged my wife and our daughter to Marion, Ohio, to go to the Harding Museum. Because of these 2 poems about President Harding, and we saw this huge marble monument to him there, which dwarfs everything else in town. And saw toured the Harding house, the family house, and so on. And I mentioned to the tour guide of the stories of Harding's black ancestry, and I was growled at. She told me that it's rumors. Okay. But I'm going to read a poem, or 2 poems rather, by James Wright, who was a white Ohio writer who died in 1980. Wright was the author of many books: The Branch Will Not Break, St. Judas, The Green Wall, 2 Citizens, a number of other books, and also translations from the Spanish and German. He won many prizes. He was a brilliant writer. He died in 1980. Wright's poems aren't really about Harding as a person of African descent, but that knowledge, or the knowledge of the stories of Harding's people. That knowledge is part of the poem's aura for me. It's a complement to the poem, an extension of it. And I like that the poems they're very different from one another, but they're under one title. 2 poems about President Harding. 1, his death. In Marion, the honey locust trees are falling. Everyone in town remembers the white hair, the campaign of a lost summer, the front porch open to the public, and the vaguely stunned smile of a lucky man. "Neighbor, I want to be helpful," he said once. Later, "You think I'm honest, don't you?" Weeping drunk. I am drunk this evening in 1961 in a jag for my countryman who died of crab meat on the way back from Alaska. Everyone knows that joke. How many honey locusts have fallen, pitched root-long into the open graves of strip mines since the first war ended, and Wilson, the gaunt deacon, jogged sullenly into silence. Tonight, the cancerous ghosts of old con men shed their leaves. For a proud man lost between the turnpike near Cleveland and the chiropractor's signs looming among dead mulberry trees, there is no place left to go but home. "Warren lacks mentality," one of his friends said. Yet he was beautiful. He was the snowfall turned to white stallions standing still under dark elm trees. He died in public. He claimed the secret right to be ashamed. 2. His tomb in Ohio, which begins with an epigraph by H.L. Mencken on William Jennings Bryan. He died of a busted gut. 100 slag piles north of us at the mercy of the moon and rain. He lies in his ridiculous tomb, our fellow citizen. No, I have never seen that place. Where many shadows of faceless thieves chuckle and stumble and embrace on beer cans, stogie butts, and graves. One holiday, one rainy week after the country fell apart, Hoover and Coolidge came to speak and snivel about his broken heart. His grave, a huge absurdity, embarrassed cops and visitors. Hoover and Coolidge crept away by night, and women locked their doors. Now junkmen call their children in before they catch their death of cold. Young lovers let the moon begin its quick spring, and the day grows old. The mean one-legger who rakes up leaves has chased the loafers out of the park. Mennigan Leonard half believes in God, and the pool room goes dark. America goes on, laughing, and Harding was a fool. Even his big pretentious stone lays him bare to ridicule. I know it. Don't look at me. By God, I didn't start this mess. Whatever moon and rain may be, the hearts of men are merciless. Okay, thank you.
Standing room, but I believe we have posters for all, and I want to warmly invite you back on October 4th. And will you join me in a round of applause for all of the presenters?